Okay, everyone, I think we are going to go ahead and kick this off a little early. We have quite a few people in the waiting room. So with that, I get to turn it over to Mark, who is running this grand affair, and we'll get started.
Hey, thank you so much, Molly. Appreciate you and the rest of the cast here coming together today for this live webcast. And let's just go around the room with some introductions. I'll go first. I'm Mark Daly. I'm the CEO of Rome, and we are focused on cybersecurity and AI as the new Rome. And we've got some solutions, and we're very focused on the market for CMMC. I'll turn it over to Walt.
Thank you, Mark. Walt Cherminsky. I've been a CISO for the last 10 years, starting out in the financial sector for two large banks, transitioning over as a partner within Fortium Partners, which provides technology leadership as a service, C-level executives. And I'm also the head of cybersecurity for Rome, and glad to be working with Mark on our mission. Off to you,
Thanks
Ron.
so much. Andrew, would you mind introducing yourself?
Absolutely. Pleasure to be here this morning. My name is Andrew Hosh. I run operations at the Clinier Group. My background, I have a CISSP. My security background got started in black hat testing for three-letter organizations, but most recently focusing on helping aerospace and aviation companies be compliant with security regulations.
Excellent, excellent. Colin, it's a great group, and Molly, you're here, so we've got to include you as well.
Oh gosh, no, I'm not here. I'm just the host. But if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I will get them over to our esteemed panelists as quick as I can.
Excellent, excellent. And last but certainly not least, Ron Ross was very fortunate to join us today. And Ron, if you wouldn't mind giving your background, that'd be awesome.
Hey, Mark, it's great to join you and Molly, Walt, and Andrew today. I recently retired from NIST after about 28 years. Prior to that, I was in the military for about 21 years. My cybersecurity career is about maybe 30 years in the DoD, the intel community, and obviously my time at NIST. Worked on a lot of the standards and guidelines that used by the public and private sector today. Happy to be here. Lots of important topics still going on in cybersecurity.
Well, that's awesome. And I want to make this a conversational event. We all know each other. We all know what's going on in the marketplace today. And Ron, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you because you you've got some deep background in cybersecurity, but also in this in some of the framework. And if you could just give us some of your tribal knowledge on what how we got to where we are today with CMMC or in security in general, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I think the security journey has started a long, long time ago. Probably goes back to the 1970s. And if you look at the advancements in technology over that time period, it's been just phenomenal. I mean, the computing power that we have today, the connectivity, all of that capability has really changed society. It's changed governments, the private sector, the way we do business, how our economy runs, even our personal lives. But with all the advancements in technology, we've also had an increase in the complexity of these systems, the hardware, the software, the firmware, trillions of lines of code, billions of devices, all connected together, helping society and business move at warp speed. So with that complexity, this is really where the cybersecurity problem starts because a lot of the things that we're dealing with, we've worked for 3 or 4 decades now to build lots of frameworks, controls, and cyber hygiene programs. So we've done an awful lot. We've made great progress, even though it doesn't seem like it. We take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but we're gaining over time. I think today, and you talked about the CMMC, that's just one more program that's rolling out to try to make sure that the security requirements that are required to protect controlled unclassified information, which is the information the federal government processes, stores, and transmits that's not classified, but it needs protection. what happens to that information when it goes over to the private sector with many of our partners and all the people that support the feds? So that's a huge issue. We have things like design documentation for the next generation weapon systems. We literally have billions of dollars of research and development invested in this intellectual property, the designs and things that help protect the warfighters, allow them to fight wars and win. The space program, it goes on and on and on. So that information is very, very valuable and critical to the future, the national and the economic security interests of the United States. The requirements have been out there for a long time. And as you would expect, organizations are at varying degrees of readiness to be able to implement those requirements. They're not easy sometimes to implement, but nonetheless, they're needed. And the DoD, this is their program to try to assess the kind of the state of where the defense industrial base is with regard to implementing those requirements, which translates to making sure we have confidence and there's trustworthiness in our DIB partners that they can protect that information, which the DoD needs for a variety of reasons. So that's kind of a nutshell how we got to where we are. And I'll turn it back over to you and we continue the discussion.
No, that was excellent. It's a great baseline of because if you think about technology and what's changed since the 70s, everything's changed. And then we've gone from an analog society to a digital society. And once we hit it's got so many productivity gains in the digital world, but it also has all these open architected holes where people can get into it, and it just it's a problem. So in a free society, which we are, we want to maintain being a free society, but we've got some holes there. And Andrew, I was wondering if you could opine for a minute on what you're seeing in the open market space today with maybe some of your clients.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, I'm not going to go back to the 1970s in terms of the history of things, but for sure the trends now, and it's been a trend for the last 4 to 5 years at least, is really supply chain attacks, which is what CMMC attempts to address, right? It really is an application against suppliers to the federal government, but a lot of attack vectors now aren't, a lot of hackers aren't going straight for the target. They're going for the people who supply the target and then get in that way. And there's a lot of examples of that in the last few years. In fact, just in the last couple of days, we had, you probably heard about several airlines getting attacked systematically, and that primarily is the attackers hitting suppliers and then getting in through the networks and into the airlines that way. So CMMC is very germane and very important, and addresses probably the biggest methodology that is being used against companies and governments.
Yeah, it's definitely a problem out there. And years ago, and you go back to the 70s before you were born, Andrew, and when you think of saboteurs from other countries, you think they would, they would blow up things. They would derail a train or whatever. Information security, or as they used to call it, the information superhighway, has so many on ramps and off ramps that can be derailed easily. And when you think about CMMC specifically, it's the subcontractors that supply the prime contractors. The prime contractors being the Boeings of the world, or the Lockheeds, or the Newport News who built ships, or who was making submarines, or whomever. And those primes have subcontractors who also have subcontractors. And when I think about CMMC, these subcontractors, some of them, a large one might be 350 people or 400 people, and they don't have the IT departments they've got great IT departments, but they don't have IT departments that are solely focused on keeping the bad actors out. And that's where the compliance from the government, CMMC, comes in and says, okay, you've got to do certain things, certain way, and you've got to lock things down and do it a certain way. Maybe Walt, would you mind taking that further and opine on that?
Sure. I think, CMMC in its first incarnation was really important, right, toward that goal of securing the suppliers within the defense industrial supply chain. Um, it was it's moved on. It's been a little bit of the can that's been kicked down the road. It's a regulation. It's being put forward to small and medium businesses who have, existential priorities, right? If they're going to pursue revenue versus, a type of insurance or protection, right? They may make the choice on revenue. And I think while CMMC is very important, and it's the new version, CMMC 2.0, relaxes the 1.0 guidelines somewhat, I think it's very important for suppliers to also see this as being beneficial to them. And what I mean by that is about 40% of cyber attacks are at small and medium businesses. It's estimated between 40 and 60%. And here's the thing, like once a small business gets attacked, there's a 60% chance that within 6 months they'll be out of business. It's not just a regulation, right? This is a process put into place to make sure that the supplier is going to be strong for the sake of the supply chain, but also for their own sake as well. And I think the 2.0 version helps in that process to move forward, but I think that awareness for small and medium businesses needs to be, I think, embedded a little bit more strongly that this is for their benefit as well, and this helps them to address the risks that they face.
Well, you make a couple good points there, and it's really difficult, I think, sometimes when the government comes out and says, okay, this is what you've got to do. This CMMC topic has been around for 10 years, right? And so, Ron, what do you think is driving some of the activity now to, I see some more activity now and people getting engaged. What do you see that's driving some of that?
I think the reality is sinking in. We've had this has been around a long time. I think our first NIST 800-171 was published in 2015, right around the time of the OPM attack, which was one of the worst attacks we ever had on the personnel records within the federal government. But I think the reality sets in. I mean, obviously, companies that want to get DoD business are going to have to comply with these requirements. I think there's a big danger here lurking. I've been involved in many assessment programs in my 35 or 40 years dealing with the federal government. The biggest one was the common criteria, where the federal government was involved in certifying or validating the results of testing on operating systems and other computer technologies.
The Orange Book.
Yeah, it was just kind of the post-Orange Book. It was the Orange Book originally back when the DoD had the program by itself and then NIST was involved. Those programs it was very expensive to evaluate those operating systems. The timeliness of the evaluation was a factor, and the program ended up being kind of folding in under its own weight, and it's not as it was envisioned to be. The grand scheme didn't pan out. There's also the danger with this program in CMMC, because when you think about the size of the defense industrial base, and I'm not sure, I've heard 100,000 contractors, 1 million contracts, whatever the numbers are, they're big. And maybe 80% of those are small and mid-sized businesses. So yes, everybody wants to be protected, but the cost of building a security program, it doesn't just start because the CMMC, lays down the gauntlet. Those programs take years to build. It's a lot of expense to build a good security program, and it takes time to layer those protections over the years. So when you come in with the current 110 requirements, there's a huge cost of implementation, just getting ready to have those assessors come in the door, whether it's producing all the documentation, the security plan, the incident response plans, the risk assessments. And then you've got to deal with all the technical controls with the encryption, the access controls, the two-factor authentication. I mean, we live this every day, so it sounds easy on paper, but it's always the implementation of those requirements is where 90% of these failures occur, because every organization is going to implement those a little differently. The assessors are, NIST produces the NIST 800-171 alpha that models our 853 alpha. All the assessment procedures are there, and they're broken down to the token level, but every one of those companies has to get assessed every 3 years. So this is not going to be just an initial expense. It's going to be an ongoing expense. And with the economy and the tight budgets and everything's kind of contracting, the budgets are getting leaner and meaner over time. This could be a real issue if it's not done properly and there's not the attention to detail, especially for the small and mid-sized businesses who may need some assistance. And maybe the MSSPs and MSPs can be a place where you can provide that kind of protected access. But then those become targets of opportunity because they have, maybe hundreds of small and mid-sized businesses with all that valuable IP sitting in that one location. So those things become huge targets, and they need to be protected at least as well as those businesses downstream.
Well, it sounds to me like it's almost an unsurmountable task. Andrew, what do you think would be the right course of action for companies, small, medium, large, that are supplying the primes to get engaged?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it doesn't, I know Ron says it's very expensive, and it can be, especially if you're a, one person IT house trying to keep the lights on and you're not worried about who's at the back door. But certainly for small and medium-sized businesses, what really the first step should be to do an inventory of what they actually need to protect. There certainly is different levels of sophistication and maturity, and maybe step one is to figure out what in your inventory is actually CUI, and work with it. If you're supplying a prime, work with your prime to confirm what is and isn't, and not take a blanket approach. If you try to apply, if you're a small company and you're trying to apply CMMC to your entire company, it might be overkill. We've run into companies who had, I'll say, large consulting firms come through and tell them, hey, you need to buy, you spend $60,000 on a new storage area network, and you need to buy, $50,000 worth of Cisco gear and all this. And when we dug in there, they had 3 PDFs that they had to protect, 3 sets of drawings essentially that they had to protect. So buying a whole new system and putting all that in place was a lot of overkill for what really just needed to be either, they could have gone with a managed service provider, or they could, isolate those 3 documents and isolate via procedure how those documents are accessed. And they weren't accessed every day either, right? I mean, it was whenever they were going to build that particular part. I mean, maybe they'd access it once or twice a year. So there's lots of ways to, so that would be like a step one. And then for sure, eventually you want your whole security posture to be as if everything is CUI, because it just protects you in general. But it doesn't have to be $500,000 to get compliant.
So that initial discussion and maybe even a gap analysis of what their current state is and what their desired state should be is so important. And it doesn't. I've noticed in the last couple of years, people, and I hate to use the term snake oil salesman, they'll put together a really neat video, and I've seen them on social media where they confuse their company name with a soda name, and they'll use some tactics to say that we can do this, but they can do a lot of really neat things, but they forget the threat protection, which is really important. But we got an interesting question that came in, and I'll throw this one at you. If it's from the audience, how is AI being used today offensively in cybersecurity and threats today?
Yeah, it's a great question because there are always obviously 2 sides, right? There's the defender side and there's the attacker side. Attackers, like, we're not short on taking advantage of AI. One clear manifestation of it was high volume of phishing mails. Then phishing mails became more sophisticated, much more difficult to spot as phishing. So, all that training that was invested in employees, well placed, however, needed to be updated and continues to need to be updated. as that sophistication grows, new types of threats are being developed. Prominently right now, AI deepfakes, where a video call from your CEO requesting $1 million transfer, can come through, and it's very hard to tell that that's not a real person. And those have occurred already out in the wild, and have had to be controlled or not. So I think volume is kind of the underlying theme of what threat actors are doing, and increased levels of sophistication and newer types of threats, however they can, are emerging now.
Well,
And
you mentioned.
I'd add to that the barrier to entry as a hacker is much lower than it was probably 18 to 24 months ago, right? I mean, you had to be a fairly sophisticated developer to and code analyzer in order to spot vulnerabilities and try to exploit them. And but now with AI, it's someone almost off the street with no experience could figure out how to execute attacks without a lot of technical know-how.
Yeah,
Maybe not successfully,
I'll add
but,
one more
but
thing.
they can at least try, right?
Sorry, I'll add one more thing to that. There is the nation state sort of aspect of it as well. In the last 2 months, one nation state in particular has doubled the amount of attacks on the United States. And let's see, the amount of personnel that they have in their agency is 5 times the number of FBI agents that we have in total.
Wow.
It's doubled. That could double again. So there's some urgency here, and the volume is that tsunami that we have to have good alerts for and be prepared for.
Well, you mentioned phishing before, and I heard a term a couple months ago. They went from phishing to spear phishing, which was targeting a certain individual, and then they go from spear phishing to what they call whale phishing, which is using and this can be done in a basement with some kid going after somebody, looking at their social media, looking at what certain individuals, and then going after them specifically based upon certain demographics, age, what they've written in social media. And so that's a piece of it. The AI piece is fascinating to me because AI, that term covers a broad spectrum, and there's different types of AI. There's the generative AI, those are large language models, and then there's also the agentic AI, which is more around the agents, and then you also throw in the rogue actors, the rogue nations, and they have a specific uh, uh, desire to cripple us in any way that they can. And when you look at some of these SMB accounts that supply the subcontractors, they've got, again, great IT departments, but they're not prepared for this. And matter of fact, I don't know if anyone's prepared for it when it comes to an AI perspective, because they can do the deep fakes, like you said, and they can really manipulate data better than it's ever been done before. I always thought I was a savvy guy when it came to phishing, and I got one recently, and I had to have a close friend of mine take a look at this. Is this real? Because it looks so real, and I'm not going to click on a link but man, it looks so real. So I mean, it's something that's out there.
Yeah, we actually experience phishing at Clinier, spear phishing quite frequently. We're pretty active on LinkedIn, and our CEO, in quotes, often is texting new employees. So we notice a pattern where when someone joins Clinier and they post on LinkedIn, "Hey, I just joined," then our CEO within a couple of days will text them from an unknown number and ask them to buy a bunch of Apple gift cards. So it's really out there.
That one came to me too. I don't know. That was a couple of years ago, but yeah, there's some really nefarious people out there, and that they spend their days thinking about this. Ron, what do you see in the AI space in terms of helping or hurting in the security space?
Yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag. I think there's a tremendous interest in AI, obviously, over the last even year or two. It's really gone off on steroids almost. It's been around since the again, I hate to go back to Andrew, late 70s again,
It's all
but
good.
AI it's an old discipline that's been around for years, decades and decades. But the increasing in processing power, the ability of storage capacity, and all these improvements in the algorithms, the models have really brought it to the forefront. But it's an AI is an application that runs on an operating system, and there's the root cause of all of our problems today, at least in my view, is we've really under invested in the underlying protections of systems, going back to the old days of trusted operating systems. And you can't rely, I mean, it's fine to talk about all these new attacks. The adversary is always going to be throwing new attacks at its targets. That's what they do. But it's incumbent upon the defensive side to have protections that are strong enough to be able to resist those attacks. And you can't rely on customers or users to always do the right thing. And so, in the stack, starting from the applications, the middleware, the operating systems, down to the integrated circuits out to the network, that's a layer set of hardware, software, and firmware. And the underinvestment in the underlying protections in the operating system and things like that really allow the integrity of these systems to be tampered with. And once you lose the system integrity, anything that you want to protect with regard to confidentiality and the eventual availability of the system is totally gone south at that point. So it's a huge problem. And the root of it is complexity. It's trying to, we innovate and we bring in more and more complexity because of the innovations. It's kind of a vicious cycle that we can't get our arms around. And therefore, we'll continue to run a risk. And yes, AI is going to make it easier for the attackers because the AI can discover weaknesses and vulnerabilities in the architecture and the underlying development processes and the code that were not discoverable before. And then the offensive people can use that as well. So it's going to be a kind of an arms race to the top here. But at the same time, we have all of our customers bringing these new AI applications into their systems. They're a black box. They have no idea what's going on in that black box. All they know is they push a button and the AI spits out something or does something. But what it's doing to the data, how much it's collecting, where it's going, all that is it's virtually invisible to the customer. And that's the real problem. Now, how we fix that, it's going to take a long time. It's going to take an industry investment. I call that giving greater transparency and visibility into the black box, producing assurance arguments. Customers are asked to buy technology with virtually no understanding about what went into producing that hardware, that software component. Where was it produced? Who produced it? What kind of developmental techniques did they use? And there's lots and lots of things you can do to harden the target underneath those applications to make it impossible for an application to bring down an entire system, or giving people access to the security kernel and being able to do things in that kernel, which may be necessary for an operational capability. But if there's no checks and balances, you end up with these large scale attacks that go worldwide in a nanosecond. And then the next thing you know, airports are shutting down in Atlanta. And that's not a good way to run a country or a society where you have the critical infrastructures are at great risk 24/7. So we got to fix that problem, and maybe artificial intelligence can help us start to go down that road.
I'd say though that the U.S. Air Force has a very good program. I know this isn't really CMMC related, but to riff off of what you said, Ron, that the U.S. Air Force recognizes this, and they've got a pretty good program around secure containers. And those containers are operating systems effectively, right? But they're operating systems that are minimized to the bare bones of what's needed for that particular application to run. And there's a whole system to make that container secure, not just on first release, but as new vulnerabilities are found, it gets patched for those vulnerabilities, and it's publicly available. I mean, you still have to register and all that, but so the U.S. government certainly recognizes what you're saying, which is that there's a lot of unknowns underneath the covers, but there is some good work being done to address that. They're not solely relying on the private sector to solve those problems.
Just to kind of carry on what you were talking about, we used to have the terms blacklisting and whitelisting. Blacklisting was listing all the bad stuff that you don't want to execute on your system, applications, ports, protocols. But that list got so long, and it was impossible to keep it up. But one of the hardest controls in 853 that it's very clear that the whitelisting control now, or only allowing specific things that you authorize to execute on a system. It's a very easy concept, but it's very difficult from a cultural perspective to enforce that. So
Yeah.
a lot of this, I call it the basic blocking and tackling. It's like a football team, whether it's high school, college, or professional. The first month of the summertime, when they get together as a team, they go through those 2-a-day practices. They're grueling. They're working on fundamentals. But those fundamentals are what allow you to build a great football team on top of that. And sometimes we go to those solutions that are, the tools, the things that sound really great, but our basic blocking and tackling has not been put into place. So and the whitelisting is one of those things that is kind of a very fundamental thing to do, but really reduces the attack surface. And that's really the bottom line. Reducing the attack surface everywhere you can gives the adversaries fewer opportunities to engage, those weaknesses and deficiencies to exploit those vulnerabilities, which can cause great harm to organizations.
That's a great point, Ron. And we got a question in from the audience that dovetails on that is, how should contractors think about overlapping obligations across multiple federal agencies? So we have some contractors that deal with more than one federal agency, and their employees probably have a full set of hair. So how would that occur? What do you think, Andrew, Ron?
Who is that? Oh, go ahead.
I'll just do the one-liner, which is the CMMC is, I'll wave the CMMC flag and give a toast to NIST for this one, but CMMC is the effort to unify all of the federal agencies' different ways of handling CUI and what is CUI. I mean, even controlled unclassified information is a fairly new term because every agency had its own term for that. And so I think CMMC is actually going to be more efficient than what companies had to deal with 10, 15 years ago.
When I always think about NIST specifically, that sets the standards for so many things, and it sets the standards, and it's not a mandate, it sets the standards in the federal government, then it spills over to the states. Anyone have any thoughts on where, even though it's not a compliant issue for municipalities or states or even higher ed, you see CMMC as the framework being applied there and effective there in the state and local markets?
Yeah, I could speak to that. The cool thing about CMMC is that it really is built on the NIST framework, right? It references the NIST framework. And the NIST framework, I'm frequently asked by clients, should we follow ISO? Should we use NIST? Should we use COVID, CIS, etc.? And my answer is, pick one, because they all overlap 80% in terms of the functional controls that they look at. Now, my preference is NIST because I think it's the more comprehensive one. It's been the lingua franca of the financial sector, which is arguably the best protected sector in our economy. Our 401ks are all safe. But I think having that broad applicability, right, allows anyone who pursues compliance with it to look confidently to any other regulator and state, we're doing this good work already. Our data is protected. We have good access management systems. Our basic hygiene, which, Ron pointed to so well, is in place. And so our attack surface is minimized, and we could be resilient with our incident response plans. Making those statements, right, is the larger part of what's required, right? When regulators come in, when primes ask their suppliers what their cyber posture is.
I think the CMMC, again, I think it's important to distinguish between what that program actually is. It's the assessment side. So there, in cybersecurity, there's two sides of the same coin. There's the functionality side, which is taking the controls or requirements and implementing those. And then the other side of the coin is coming in, either doing a self-assessment or independent third-party assessment to validate the customer's claim that they've met the requirements of the controls. So CMMC obviously is at the latter part of that discussion. But the other thing, I go back to the old common criteria program, because when the NSA, working with its the testing laboratories, would evaluate an operating system, it was very expensive, but the vendor had to pick up the cost of that evaluation, but it was amortized over hundreds and thousands of customers out there. This program is different. Every assessment goes to the actual entity that's being assessed to see if they've satisfied those 171 requirements. So that does increase the overall cost. To get back to the point about companies serving multiple agencies, that's why the 171 is really critical, because it presents a single government face with regard to the requirements, and that's critical. Federal agencies who want to tweak those requirements have to understand that every company can't be developing a separate thing for every federal agency they want to sell to. That was the power of the FedRAMP program. You basically do an evaluation, and then the agencies could use those cloud service products, the software as a service platform infrastructure, and the vast majority of the evaluation was done one time. So every agency wouldn't have to come in and get their assessors in there to come into these cloud service providers, which was totally unworkable. So 80% of the cost of the whole cybersecurity program is typically implementing the requirements, and about 20% is on the assessment side. And that 80-20 rule sometimes gets out of whack, and you end up spending a whole lot more on the assessment side. And that's dangerous, because it robs the organization of scarce resources to actually implement protections, the safeguards, the countermeasures, the real controls, which stop adversaries and stop that theft of intellectual property. So it's something that I think the DoD has to keep an eye on to make sure that balance doesn't get out of whack, because it's only going to hurt them. And when you lose those companies in the DIB who are small, mid-sized companies who are very innovative, you absolutely need that innovative technology and that brain power. And sometimes the best ideas are coming from the companies who are not all that prepared to protect the information. So and these are all things the DoD's thought about, but it's not an easy problem to solve. And I think the jury is still out on how all this is going to play out. Artificial intelligence will likely help get people ready for evaluation, maybe having templates for developing security plans. There's a lot of things these AI tools or the GRC tools could be supplemented with AI components to help the customers be more efficient and effective in getting ready for evaluation. So there's some bright spots there.
No, there certainly are, and that's one of the areas where it's so painful for large or small companies to do the preparation work for CMMC and collecting all the data. It's interesting. My last company, I did a lot of SAP work over the years, and I would do an assessment. Say, well, where's your data? Oh, it's all in SharePoint. They don't know where their data is, and they don't know where it is in a small company either. And that is a painful process to go through to collect the data that you need for the assessment. And AI actually does make it a lot simpler to do that. And there's tools being developed today that will enable small and large companies the ability to get through that painful piece of also defining the policies and procedures that are part of the assessment of the certification process. And that's being developed today, and that'll make it faster. I think. Well, I told him, is it 12 months normally to get a certification done with an average size company? Is that about right?
That's an interesting question. Typically, it's 12 to 18 months to get to compliance for a small company. Why that's interesting to me is a couple of days ago, the Army Corps of Engineers issued the proclamation to all of its suppliers that they expect compliance with CMMC 2.0 by October. That's a few months from now. So given that reality, right, of how long it takes to get to compliance properly, I think sends, hopefully generates some urgency. I think CMMC 2.0 provides the latitude where getting on that path and demonstrating it effectively, like, should be sufficient for Army Corps of Engineers. But that was a pretty interesting announcement. And, to me, it says that there's some urgency behind this being generated, and, hopefully we see traction being gained.
Well, there needs to be a sense of urgency, and then there'll be aside from the security piece of this, it's really the right thing to do for America. Let's just put it out there. And when you're an SMB company and you're working with the primes and you've got a contract with the prime supplying the did or the mid, hopefully you're making some decent coin. And if you are, you need to partition some of that for getting CMMC compliant. And it's the right thing to do for the country. We are under attack in a lot of different areas as a nation. And you need to think of it that way because it's the right thing to do. It's not just a matter of, yeah, you got to spend a little money to do it. It's just the right thing to do. And I think that having a program out there for 10 years to me is unacceptable that it's got the least amount of traction that it has. It's a great program, but we've got to get better adoption. And I think there's a couple of ways to do that. I think AI is definitely going to help that. But I'm calling all the patriots out there. You need to do it because it's the right thing to do to protect our assets. And we're in a different world than we were. Ron goes back to the 70s, so do I. And I started my career building mainframe computers, and back then they were water chilled. We used to pull the water out of the Hudson River to cool down the chips. Now I know in NVIDIA everything comes full circle. They have water chilled chips nowadays as well. And some things do come full circle, but there needs to be a sense of urgency in getting that certification and starting the process. And it doesn't have to be painful. You got to pick the right partners to work with. And there are certainly some companies out there that can do that.
Walt's comment reminded me about the 12 to 18 months. I hate to go back to my football analogies, but it's kind of like, you show up for that first two a day and you're totally out of shape. You're maybe 30 pounds overweight and the coach says, how come you didn't get in shape? And you say, you just throw your hands up. You can't, there's no sense of urgency that can get a player into shape in a day. And I think the same thing holds true for these organizations. Now, it's true that it's been around for 10 years, but it's on the companies to be complying with what they're supposed to comply with, but it's also, there's some responsibility on the part of the federal government to make sure that you just don't walk away and things just go to hell in a handbasket, and you check in, then all of a sudden everybody gets serious and you expect when you snap your fingers everyone's going to be done by October. It does take a long time. And that's why my initial comment about building a security program doesn't happen in a day. Yes, it's expensive, but that cost is not something that usually a company incurs all at the same time. It's built over time. The capability occurs over time. So, AI tools can help, but again, those AI tools are going to cost these companies money. And there needs to be some creative solutions to help ensure that we don't lose these critical innovative technologies and capabilities for the warfighters, because we have the assessment program standing in the way of them bringing that to the warfighters and making sure that next generation weapon system is better than our adversaries. So again, I'm not minimizing the difficulty of the problem. I'm just saying that there has to be alternative solutions. What happens? There's got to be a plan B. If everything goes according to the way you want it, then everything works out fine. But how many times in the history of anything has that ever happened? And so what's the plan B for the DoD if things slow down, the pipeline gets clogged up? You don't have, companies that go through the initial preparation for assessment. The reason why there's not a log jam right now is because I've heard most of the companies that say they're ready for evaluation, when the assessors show up, they find something different. And so you don't bring somebody in until they're ready for the assessment. So those are all issues that have to be dealt with over time. And we're not just talking about a small number of companies. We're talking about the granddaddy of the defense industrial base. There's a lot of moving parts there. And I think there are solutions available. I think the tools you talked about, Mark, are going to help. But the question is, how much are they going to cost? How soon can they be deployed? And what is the end result? How much confidence do we have that the information that we want to protect is actually being protected to the degree that it needs to be to really stand up against these very sophisticated adversaries that are after that tech today?
I'd say there's some good news though, right? So when 800.171 first came out, let's take multi-factor authentication. When it first came out, multi-factor authentication was definitely expensive, very clunky. You needed a hardware token, often issued by one of three companies who had a virtual monopoly on the market, right? But now multi-factor authentication is kind of almost a given, right? And every cloud, Microsoft, for example, if you're on O365, right, you get it out of the box and you're not paying anything extra. So I think, and that's just one example of the requirements pushing the technology in a certain direction. So a lot of things that were expensive to implement when 800.171 first came out are really nominal today. Centralized logging is another one, right? That's back in the day, that was a very complicated thing, and you needed a separate server to do that. And now you can, send them off to the cloud with barely maybe a couple of lines of configuration, or if you want to host them locally, then there's both open source and off-the-shelf products that off the shelf cost a little bit of money, but implementation is kind of one click, and open source free, but your implementation might be a little bit more involved, right? It's not going to be one click. But so there's a lot of the cost of compliance has come way down, and I think it will continue to come down.
Yeah,
From a technology point of view.
I'll lean into that a little bit, Andrew. I agree. I think the themes in the last of the major security conferences over the last couple of years have been consolidation and platformization, being able to roll up features under one vendor, under one platform. You see this a lot with MDR solutions, or managed detection response solutions, where they're bringing on adjacent functions to that important function, and the price gets reduced in that sense to clients. The complexity gets reduced, and you're under a platform that works well. The other part that's encouraging is, because of open source, there are smaller vendors that are emerging with one-stop shop, so to speak, platforms that provide you a platform for assessment all the way through to a 24/7 SOC. And these can be had for a relatively affordable price that can be consumed by a small and medium business. The trick is, of course, to have trusted advisors, right? Like yourself, like Ron and others, to be able to come into an organization and have them understand that the choices they make are the best ones for their organization. I think that aspect of a trusted advisor is really key to moving down this path, with all and getting all the benefit out of it.
Yeah, agreed completely.
One of the you talk about the cost of the technology. Andrew was talking about the two-factor authentication. Yes, these technologies there is an investment required there, but I think a lot of it has to be taken in the context of what is the organization's mission or business, and what would losing your business for 2 or 3 days, the lost revenue, or the loss of intellectual property, the next generation design documentation for the F-35 or the Navy submarine program, the stealth programs. I mean, you can't put a price tag on the loss of the information, and sometimes we focus on the cost of the protection from buying the product, the technology, the service, whatever it is, and we don't factor the cost of losing the capability, losing the mission. Someone mentioned earlier about the cyber attack. 60% of those companies are gone because they can't recover from that attack. That's catastrophic for these companies. So I think when we're investing anything in cybersecurity, if we take a look at the possibility of the company, the effects of the mission business, it'll put everything in perspective, and that investment becomes more palatable at that point.
Yeah, that is very true. And well, that's oh, we have another question. for companies managing controlled unclassified information, what's the most overlooked compliance gap? Who would like to take that one?
In my experience, the most overlooked compliance gaps are really around the workflow for handling the CUI in and of itself. So, there might be disparate procedures for different roles, but there's no life cycle for that CUI. And so getting all of that together and into a holistic view of the world is probably the thing I see the most. You got HR's got their requirements, and the operator on the manufacturing floor's got their requirements, but on and on, but no one sees the whole picture, and so you get gaps in any time there's a handoff between where the CUI is supposed to be and where it needs to be. So that's where we see, IT, for example, is not usually talking to the mechanic on the machine floor, right, or the machinist on the machine floor. And that machinist may not necessarily understand the cyber implications of the drawing they have in front of them. So it's really that overarching policy. I mean, technical implementation, centralized logging, MFA, those used to be the big hurdles, but nowadays those should not be big hurdles even for a small company. That's
No, Andrew,
my view of the world.
you made a great point, and one of the points is about IT not talking to the machinist on the machine floor or the manufacturing floor. That's where I see agentic AI and security teaming up to help the manufacturing piece of this, especially if it's a higher tech manufacturing. It could be low tech manufacturing too, but being able to use an agent on a manufacturing floor that's an AI agent that does talk to IT, and you also would have some security related to that and how that works. But that's where you're going to see some radical change. And I don't think it's going to be terribly expensive to do that down the road and quickly. It might not be October, Walt, which we would love, but it's going to be happening sooner than later. And with one of the things about AI, we have a question here, and I'll just, tell us about Rome, history of Rome, and how Rome came to be today in the space. Well, Rome was a company back in the 70s and 80s that was sort of like Apple in the B2B space before Apple was born. And actually, Steve Jobs used to spend a lot of time on our campus. And Rome was bought by IBM in the 80s for 1.25 billion, sold it to Siemens. I worked for IBM, Rome, and Siemens during that whole time frame, and I resurrected the brand recently, the past year, and I did it, and true to form to the original company, which was in the mil-spec space, and a part of Rome's mil-spec was sold to a company called L'Oreal, which got bought by Lockheed. I started the new Rome with the vision of AI and cybersecurity having a nexus at some point, and I see that nexus coming down the pike. And at first, I'm on a couple different boards of companies that are AI companies, and I have been for 5 years, long before ChatGPT was something that our kids were using for doing their homework. And agentic AI is a little bit more of an animal that's going to have a bigger impact, especially when it comes to manufacturing. And I would caution the people that are out there today to not just take your code and dump it into ChatGPT and say, "Hey, rewrite this in Python," or take your company data and put it into ChatGPT, because it's not secure to do that. And there are companies that actually do that today. There's companies that are using large language models, and they're dumping information in there without some sort of filter that is giving up company information that can be had and used. So that's not a OpenAI and ChatGPT and all those are great tools, but they got to be used the right way. And we're in a really early adoption phase of what AI is, but it's in my career, I've never seen anything happen so rapidly in my life, and it's going to have a radical change. And when we go back to the shop floor, you know, yeah, your IT guy's not looking at what's happening on the shop floor, the manufacturing environment. How's that going to change? Well, it's got to be secure, and think about an AI agent in that regard. So I didn't mean to opine, but anyway, that's how Rome got started, get revamped, and we see a nexus. So we're working. We've got partners, and we've got stuff in development to address all this right now. And you know, I'm here with an esteemed panel of folks, and it's always a learning experience for me when I get around folks of this caliber to learn what's going on in their worlds and what they're seeing with their customers. Hopefully, I answered the question about Rome. That's my commercial, the best I could do.
Nicely done.
All right. So, Walt, Ron, Andrew, like to, we're coming up on the hour. We got 6 minutes left. Do you want to take some questions or ask each other questions or?
Yeah, if there's anything from the audience, happy to answer questions.
Yeah, we had a couple others too. I was trying to chat them in as we were getting them. I have a couple more. What are the top 3 things every organization should prioritize right now to prepare for CMMC certification?
You know, I can start, but I know Ron and Andrew have a bunch of thoughts here. You know, the first piece of advice that I always give a client when they ask me about their cybersecurity program and their path to it is, and this is going way back, is know thyself, right? Know what your purpose is, what you're using your IT for, and what your assets are. So many organizations, most of them, still don't have a complete asset inventory. Now, how are you going to put controls around assets if you're not clear as to what they all are? That's a start. That's, you know, one place to start.
Yeah, I'd also say trying to find you mentioned trusted advisor, you know, trying to read through 110 security requirements, which require pretty comprehensive knowledge of IT and applications and security and networking. It can be daunting. And so having someone you can just ask questions about, you know, probably 80% of those requirements are obvious how you would go meet them, and 20% there be some demons and gray areas. So finding someone who can give you quick answers that you trust is a good first step. Though I do agree with Walt, like knowing what you have, you know, so that you're not, again, spending $500,000 to protect 3 drawings, you know, is also a good place to start.
Okay, there's one other question. So how can primes support their suppliers in meeting security requirements? And I think this says without creating bottlenecks. I think it's a typo, but if I'm wrong, please chat that back in and I'll restate the question.
The biggest problem I've seen is the primes are very lax at telling you what actually is CUI and what's not CUI. And they sometimes will blanket things like, hey, everything in this program is CUI, but in fact, the federal government doesn't think everything in that program is CUI. So there's a bit of a laziness factor there. And, you know, certainly for someone like a Boeing, I'm not saying Boeing does this, but someone like a Boeing, it's very easy to just blanket apply everything. All data is CUI on this. We're done. Move along. But that's not, you can't do that as a small or medium sized supplier, right? You've got lots of different clients and you can't just blanket everything. So that's the part that we see the most is, you know, which parts of the program are and which specific data is actually CUI, you know, in the eyes of the government versus what some program manager or project manager said, you know, in a meeting, kind of off the cuff. That's what I've seen. I defer to Walt or Ron.
Ron?
You know, one thing primes provide are participation in their enclaves as well for suppliers. There's a cost associated with it, but there's also, you know, a level of being there together with your prime and keeping your CUI within the enclave, and that's, you know, it's a strong measure. There are still other things that need to be done within the organization, but putting your CUI in the prime's enclave is a good solid step as well, with a cost.
Yeah, I'd like to just want to circle back on that last question. I just strongly agree with Walt, and this goes back to what Andrew said as we opened up the discussion today about it's all about scope. And it's just like in real estate, location, location, location. It's all about scoping and reducing your attack surface. It's a physics problem when you come down to it. You don't want to have to protect things that are outside of your perimeter where CUI is being processed, stored, and transmitted. Sometimes that takes discipline, but it can be a great cost savings if you get your handle on what is CUI, first of all. And I agree that the feds don't always do a great job at telling an organization that they have CUI. That should be number one rule is if you're a contractor, the feds have an absolute obligation to tell you when they're sending CUI your way so you can then do your due diligence to protect it. Without that information, nothing's going to go well downstream. But reducing the attack surface, ports, protocols, services, applications, anything in that scoping area where CUI is going to be processed, stored, and transmitted, you want to simplify everything you can to reduce the effect of having to apply those controls widely across the organization. Although there is an advantage to having an organization that's well protected just for your setting CUI apart. You want to have a business that's well protected today because it's about survivability. And even if there was never a CUI program, it makes good business sense to protect your systems, and using the appropriate tools and techniques and processes to get to that end game is still job number one, I think, for every business, no matter how big they are.
Oh, excellent. Ron, would you mind, and this is off the cuff, there's been some hacks into the government, and one of them was the F-35. And I read something recently, and I don't know if CMMC compliance would have prevented that, but could you just illustrate for the audience, because no, it didn't make the 6 o'clock news, and a lot of people in your circle know about it, and I read about it. How did the plans for the F-35, if you know, get over to China?
Well, I'm not exactly sure of all the details on that. Some of that, is classified, but I think it was a contractor or subcontractor. It might not have even been outside of this country. But the problem is a general problem, whether it happens in Australia or in the United States or in Canada. They're all using the same technology. So you basically have that problem when you've got intellectual property, especially things that are tied to design documentation that are part of critical systems. This is why our very first standard we developed was FIPS 199, which I call that the great triage standard. It was a realization that you can't protect everything to the highest degree all the time. So things that have the most impact on your mission or business, the high impact things, high value assets, critical systems, those get most of your attention. So I think that principle is still in play today. So these individual breaches that happen, they shouldn't be surprising. The adversaries know what we have. In many cases, they know our systems better than we do. So a lot of times, our traditional strategy of keeping the bad guys out at the perimeter, you can do that 80% of the time if you're doing everything right. But that still leaves 20% of the time when those attackers are bringing their A game and you're not. And that information becomes highly vulnerable. So this is why I still think it's a good idea to do the triage and make sure that things that are really critical, even within the DoD, all the CUI, it may have the same tag on it, but I can guarantee you some of that CUI is more important than others.
Yep.
And it deserves more scrutiny. There's some highly classified programs where CUI is not classified yet, but it's kind of a maturation process during the R&D process. The information, the concepts, they become more critical as you go through that life cycle. It starts with a bright idea and then ends up in an aircraft somewhere downstream through the life cycle. So it's really important to recognize the differences, and the value of the information is really what it's all about. And that should dictate absolutely how much rigor you place into protecting on the functionality side and also the assurance side as well.
No, that's awesome. That was a great response, and I read about this a while ago, and it just and that's what I mean. It's all up to us to protect our assets, and that's why I'm on the CMMC bandwagon as much as I am, and I appreciate all your time today. Molly, do we have any other questions before we wrap this up?
Nope. But I will say, if you guys want to access the recording, I'll be sending that out and then also posting on LinkedIn probably next week. So if you want to reach out to any of the panelists, please feel free to do that. And thank you very much for your time. Go ahead, Mark.
Anyone has any questions around CMMC, just reach out to any one of us and we'll be happy to guide you in the right direction. Thank you all. I appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Mark, for organizing this.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Have a good one.